Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya. Thank you. Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swamini Namane. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine. Nirvisesa Sanyavadi Paschachara Satarine. You want me to use this? Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So we'll discuss a little bit. If we have time, we'll do an exercise in discovering times when you had difficulty cooperating and trying to understand why and what could be done about it, which I think is important. Okay. There should be a chapter on cooperation. Yes? And what's it called? Cooperation, Our Big Challenge? I can't find it. Where is it?
17.
What?
Number 17, cooperation.
Number 17, Cooperation, Our Biggest Challenge. Okay. Page 200. It's page 200 in the edition printed in India. If you buy it on Amazon and they print it, the book is almost 100 pages longer because they made wider margins, so it wouldn't be page 200. For whatever that's worth, okay. It is said that if you reach the top of a mountain alone, you didn't climb a very high mountain. This is because we can achieve much more by working in a team than working by ourselves. Working with others is often difficult. Let's look how we can work better together. So, some of us by nature are loners. Not people who loan money, but people who like to stay alone. And obviously you can accomplish something alone, but not as much as you can accomplish as a team, right? Like Bhakti Steve. You know Bhakti Steve, the one from Apple? Well, he had a lot of good ideas, and he found smart people who could execute them because he was smart enough to know he couldn't do it on his own. So he had the ideas, he had the vision, and he got the people that could help him. And that's the way life is. We all have our gifts, and we all have our handicaps. And so when we have a team, then what we're not good at, someone is good at. And what we're good at, someone's not good at. That's the way life is. So we need to learn how to work in teams. Even Prabhupada said, I was one man loitering in the street with a few books, what could I do? And then you came, and then you helped me. So he gave credit. Of course, we gave credit to him, and he gave credit to us. But even though everything was his credit, he recognized that one man alone couldn't do it. So picture this scenario. I don't know if I ever shared this with you. Picture this scenario. The new book. Get your copy today. If you're in London, you can get it from Jenny. And or you can get it on Amazon. So, let's go back to 1965. Prabhupada's in New York, he's preaching, right? And then he starts contacting some hippies and things are going. It's 1966. Now, as you know, devotees like Mukunda Maharaj, devotees like Achyutananda, Kirtanananda, Hayagriva, Satsvarup Maharaj, Jadharani, and a few others who aren't with us, who didn't make it for the long run, but did some service at that time. Let's just imagine they were all coming to hear Prabhupada and they all went away. and not one person adopted Krishna consciousness, what would happen to the, what would happen? Where would ISKCON be? That not one person took it up. Because the people who took it up are the ones who spread it. And you could say Prabhupada was spreading it. Yeah, he was. Without him, it wouldn't happen. But these were the foot soldiers. They were actually doing it. So if they didn't join, there wouldn't really be a movement, because there'd be nobody to do anything. Right? So that's why Prabhupada said, without you, I couldn't have done it. I'm one man loitering in the street, you're also loitering in the street. Take the gourd and the string, put them together, and you have an instrument. So, I'm loitering, you're loitering, together we're doing something. Srila Prabhupada said he could not have spread the Krishna consciousness movement alone. Quote, "Nobody should think that I have got so great ability I can do. No, it is simply by cooperation we can do very big thing. United we stand, divided we fall. We must be combined together." Sankirtan. Sankirtan means many men combined together chanting. That's from a room conversation with the Radha Damodar Sankirtan party in March 16th, 1976 in Mayapur. For many of us, working cooperatively with others is challenging. It can even be painful. True or true? Yeah, it's not easy. Yet because cooperation is fundamental to spreading Krishna consciousness, Srila Prabhupada continuously stressed its importance. This is because he had previous experience of a lack of unity. After the demise of Srila Prabhupada's spiritual master, the mission of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, the Gaudiya Math, fragmented. As the Gaudiya Math divided, it lost power and efficacy. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada was concerned that the same thing might happen to ISKCON. He knew that to successfully spread a worldwide movement, unity was essential. So, Prabhupada talked a lot about unity, but you can understand a little more about why he talked about it, because he was part of a movement that didn't succeed because they couldn't be, or didn't succeed on the level that they had the potential to succeed on because they couldn't unite. So basically, a movement that was at one time very powerful and growing and having an extremely powerful effect on the people of India was reduced because of fragmentation due to disagreement. So when Prabhupada's saying we should cooperate, it's not just a theory. He saw the tragedy that occurred when his own spiritual master's organization fragmented and fought and divided properties and started their own independent institutions. Prabhupada once wrote to a leader in ISKCON, "Let us try to work cooperatively, otherwise the fighting spirit will ruin our great movement." And as you know, Prabhupada said it'll never be ruined outside, it'll only be ruined from the inside. Hare Krishna. Did you see my video I made? It was titled, "ISKCON can never get so bad that you can't make it worse." Unfortunately, I didn't come up with that idea. What's his name? Jordan Peterson said, "The world can never get so bad that you can't make it worse." And I thought, well, ISKCON can never get so bad that we couldn't do something to make it worse. There's always somebody out there who's going to criticize somebody and agitate someone's mind. So no matter how bad it gets, we can always agitate more minds. Yeah. You know, we've seen that there has been efforts on the parts of Christians and concerned parents to in some way stop or deter our movement, but it's never been successful. Temporarily maybe, but not permanently. But the biggest damage was done internally. If you actually look at the history and say, there was a anti-cult movement in the late 70s. And so devotees were being kidnapped by professional, quote-unquote, deprogrammers, and they would, your parents would say, I'm going to pick you up in such and such a place, meet me over here on the corner, and then the deprogrammers would come and throw you in their car and say, your parents are behind you, we're taking you to this hotel, or some scenario like that, they would get you. And so it was not uncommon that devotees would be kidnapped. And these deprogrammers would just try to brainwash them. This is nonsense, etc. So it was, there were organizations, anti-cult organizations, and there were also court cases in which people said they were kept against their force. That's the idea of brainwashing. You coerced. We've detached you from your family, you don't have a good touch on reality, and your free will has been supplanted by our will, and you can't make choices. So these were court cases like that. And, we lost some money here and there, but it didn't really do a whole lot. But the internal problems were hugely detrimental to the progress of our movement. I would say they had tens of times more disastrous effects than anything that anyone from the outside did. Even in, the 70s, the German government froze our accounts, took our properties. Not even such a big problem, because we just build them all up again. As long as we have enthusiasm, we can start from scratch and build it up. But if we fail as individuals, if we start fighting and creating factions, and then you can't build it up again, because you destroy one another. So it's what Prabhupada's saying is historical fact. It's never going to happen outside. The outside influence is very weak. Victimized by Kali. I believe cooperation is one of the biggest challenges we face. More than anything else, how we meet this challenge will determine how Krishna consciousness spreads. A devotee once told me that his temple leaders knew exactly what they needed to do to take their temple to the next level, but they couldn't cooperate enough to make it happen. It is incumbent upon us to make every effort possible to do whatever is necessary to cooperate, even though it might seem impossible. So what could be more tragic than that? Like, here's the plan, it's on paper, everyone looks at it and says, yes, this is the plan, this will take us to the next level, and we can't, amongst ourselves, agree who's going to be in charge, who's going to do this, do that, whose ideas will follow, and so forth. Or we can't figure out a system where we could work together, whether it's autocratic, democratic. They have another one called sociocracy, where it's group consent, or whatever it is. We couldn't work, It's like, what could be more sad than that? You know what to do, but you can't do it. Cooperation demonstrates Vaishnava culture. Prabhupada would sometimes use the expression, quote, unquote, victimized by Kali, whenever he found his disciples under the influence of Kali Yuga's power. Kali means quarrel. Kali will do his best to cause quarrel and dissension amongst us. And he often does an amazingly good job of it. What we often fail to realize is that the quarreling itself is almost always a more serious problem than the problem we're quarreling about. Hare Krishna. Have you seen that? Like, okay, here's a problem, let's say, it's a problem we have to solve. But if we fight about the problem, it could create a more disastrous effect than the problem itself. Have you seen that? Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I want to go back to something I just read that is important also. Yeah, anyway, yeah. So we're in the atmosphere of Kali Yuga, the age of quarrel. So in the age of Kali, the tendency for people to not get along is much stronger. And because it's stronger, if we don't really make a valiant effort to work out ways we can cooperate, then Kali can do all kinds of tricks on us. And so at least we should be aware that cooperation doesn't just happen so easily in this age. It requires some work. Srila Prabhupada writes, quote, "The test of our actual dedication and sincerity to serve the spiritual master will be in this mutual cooperative spirit to push on this movement and not to make factions and deviate." And so there were other statements similar to this when Prabhupada was asking for devotees to come to Vrindavan when he was in his last days. Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, "Certainly they will come, Prabhupada, because they love you." And then Prabhupada said, "Their love will be tested by their ability to cooperate after I leave." So he he was defining, he just shot back and defined love. Oh, they love you, they'll come. No, well, if they love, not just that they'll come because they love me, but after I go, they'll cooperate. That will show their love. And I think there's one more statement like that, a similar statement, that this is how you'll demonstrate your love. And so, when things are difficult, as they often become, sometimes we become discouraged. Oh, how is it going to go on? This devotee is not cooperating with that devotee, or these devotees are fighting, and we're Vaishnavas, we should be above this, and it can be quite discouraging. Because we expect more of one another, and we expect more of ourselves, right? The more you expect, the more discouraging it is when it doesn't happen. So Prabhupada said, whatever happens, stay in ISKCON, make it better, because if you leave, you can't really make it better. So stay in and work on it. And so a lot of devotees will say that sometimes I would feel like leaving because then I could just do it better, or do it my way, or I wouldn't have to work with bureaucracy or whatever. And so staying and working through the bureaucracy and working things out is the austerity that Prabhupada is asking us to do. So stay within, make it work. It's not going to get better if you go. You might do something better, but it's not going to make the movement better. So do the austerity of trying to work things out. And that's, to me, that's a sign of maturity that we all need. And to not be able to work it out is a sign of immaturity. You agree? It's easy just to walk away. And many times devotees were not mature enough to work well together, so Prabhupada said, okay, you go here, and then you go there. And he separated them because they couldn't work together. But so that was a pragmatic decision, but it wasn't something ideally he would have wanted. He would rather they would have worked it out. That would be the obvious Krishna conscious way to deal with it. So sometimes Prabhupada made those compromises to keep peace, but it wasn't the first choice. In another letter, this is December 15th, 1973, to Marudvisa. The whole world is going to hell, and everyone is suffering. In light of this, how can we argue amongst one another and neglect our responsibility for claiming these fallen souls, going back to home, back to God? Can you imagine your house is on fire, right? The fire department comes, and they don't do anything because they're all arguing with one another, and your house is burning down, and you're thinking, what's going on here? Why aren't you putting my house? No, just give us a minute. We have to sort this problem out. And then they all get frustrated, and they just get in the truck, and some run off, and some drive back. Could you imagine? So basically, that's what Prabhupada's saying here. The world's going to hell. You have the medicine to cure it, and you're sitting around fighting, and nothing's happening. Yes? I mean, there's room for constructive criticism. There's room for dialogue. But Prabhupada's saying, when it goes to this point where you become dysfunctional or static and nothing happens, then it's a travesty and it is a betrayal of our duty. Right? I don't like this, so I'm not going to do it. And okay, so let everyone go to hell. Is that what you want? So that's why Prabhupada would always beg us to cooperate, because it was obviously necessary. And the stakes are very high. Giving Krishna consciousness is high stakes. If you open a restaurant and you shut it down and you're not a devotee, it's a problem for you, but it's not a loss for the world. But this is a loss for the world. For us it's not a loss. Yeah, I can stay here and chant, eat pakoras, I'm fine. But it's a loss for them. It's a loss for the world. So that's Prabhupada's point. Let me read this again, because it's such a nice letter. The whole world is going to hell, and everyone is suffering. In light of this, how can we argue amongst one another and neglect our responsibility for reclaiming these fallen souls for going back home, back to Godhead? Srila Prabhupada once told a devotee that if he did not like what the others were doing, he should set the example. Prabhupada severely chastised him for simply criticizing and not pushing forward ISKCON. You see, the problem is criticism has a very negative energy. And so quite often when a devotee was criticizing, Prabhupada said, well, just set the example. They'll see the example and they'll follow your example. But criticism, because it's so negative and it's so antithetical to Vaishnava etiquette and Vaishnava mentality, Prabhupada he wanted to rid our movement of criticism. Then you might say, but there's so much criticism goes on. It's human nature. But Prabhupada was very much against it, because it was it's so detrimental to the progress of our Krishna consciousness. The point is that on the material platform, we may not want to cooperate unless another person is also willing to cooperate, but the spiritual platform is different. Yeah. So sometimes you have to make compromises. So, here are some things we can do to cooperate better, and you can do a self-evaluation and see if you need to improve in these areas. Make compromises. Listen empathically. Understand the point of view of other devotees. Give up the need to be right. Work on changing yourself rather than changing others. Focus on what's already working in a relationship. Identify what the other party and you already agree on. Like sometimes we disagree, but we may agree on something. So, and the other point, there may be problems in the relationship, but focus more on what works in the relationship rather than what doesn't work. Like there's a letter. I don't know if I have this in the book. It's a nice letter. No, just a short chapter. There's a letter, and a godbrother of Prabhupada has a disciple. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but when Prabhupada first came to America, he was trying to get help from Gaudiya Math, which meant help from his godbrothers or from their disciples. And so one disciple had written Prabhupada. He was a disciple of Prabhupada's godbrother, and he showed interest in coming to America. And no, I don't know if it was this actual incident. It may be, or maybe another incident. But they were discussing the preaching in America and the possibility of him coming. And within that discussion, they had some disagreement about something, about the mission of Bhaktisiddhanta, and that was discussed in the letter. And Prabhupada had mentioned a few points which were different than the points this other person was mentioning. And then Prabhupada, after mentioning a few points, he said, But let's not go further with this because we're discussing agreement. We're discussing working together. So I don't want to go in this direction because we disagree on this point. So he was willing to overlook that to focus on working together. And the point that they were discussing was not a minor point. It was quite a big point about the mission and vision of Bhaktisiddhanta, what he wanted, what he didn't want. And Prabhupada was willing to overlook it. And he said, as we are discussing working together, let us not dwell on this. So that's very interesting, isn't it? Identify what you and the other party already agree on. Be aware of the assumptions you made about others. They are often false. And the consequent judgments you hand out. Like sometimes we just don't like somebody and we don't even know them. Or you may have heard something bad about them from someone who doesn't like them. I think Shivram Swami was saying, one handicap you have as a visiting preacher is you find out everything about the temple from the person who's driving you to the temple, who picks you up at the airport. So you get his point of view. And then if you accept that as gospel truth, you'll make all your decisions based on what you heard. We're having this situation at the temple, and this devotee this, and that devotee that. And you don't even know the devotees, and you finally meet them, and you go, oh, that's so-and-so. I don't like him, because the driver doesn't like him, and he told me he's bad. Isn't it? It's interesting, isn't it? So, prejudices, assumptions. And so there's a book called The Four Agreements, and they say these are 4 ways to live life, and one of the agreement is don't make assumptions. Get the facts. But when you make assumptions, then you judge people or judge situations, often incorrectly. Be willing and ready to resolve conflict. Unfortunately, there are some people who don't want to resolve conflict. They just want to be right. Have you ever met those people? There's no discussion. I'm right and you're not. That's the only discussion. So it doesn't go very far. See and appreciate the good in those you have difficulty working with or you disagree with. Be grateful for even the least that others do for you and express your gratitude. Don't defend yourself when feedback is given to you or when others complain about something you did or said, but accept feedback with a motive to improve. So, somebody, say, Prabhu, when we're having prasadam, you knocked over the pot of dal and it fell on the floor and you just walked out, you didn't clean it. Okay, that's like simple. Could you come and clean it now? So sometimes when you tell people like that, there's this visual. They don't do this, but the visual is like this. Like you can't tell me. I don't want to hear it. Or the visual is, you do that. Well, last week you dropped it also. There's no resolution. There's just either blocking it, defending it. Well, who are you? You're not my authority. Yeah, but you spilt the dal and you just didn't notice it. Or maybe you did, but it needs to be cleaned up. Can you do it? Well, if the temple commander tells me, I'll do it, but you're not the temple commander. Right? So that's what it feels like if you're on the receiving end of that. It's good to put yourself on the receiving end of your own behavior, to imagine what it feels like to other people when you do that. Have you ever done that? You look at your behavior sometimes. If you suspect that your behavior is not ideal, and then ask yourself, I wonder what other people feel like when I act that way. Like when they try to point out a mistake I made and I tell them, well, you do that. Well, you're not perfect either. Hare Krishna. Prabhu, you just, left this out here and the car blew up. Well, you're not perfect either. It's like, where are we going with that? Right? Give feedback with a heart to help, not from feelings of superiority. So this is a problem if you ever become a leader and it goes to your head, you think you have the right to criticize, condemn, push people around. But if you're a leader, you have to be very careful, because you are now entrusted with the horrible service of having to correct people, which Prabhupada said is a thankless task for a guru or a leader. And the only way it'll be effective if you have to correct people, if that's your service, is that you have a heart to help. Your motive is to help. It's not to boss around or condemn or put anybody down. And lastly, focus on solutions, not problems. Prabhupada sums all this up in one sentence. This is a classic. Listen to this, everyone. On the count of 3, wake up. 1, 2, 3. Good morning. Quote, "The reason why there is difficulty and competitive spirit is that everyone wants to be supreme." Pretty simple, right? We write a book on cooperation. We open it up, page 1. The problem is everyone wants to be supreme. Page 2, read page 1. Page 3, read page 1. There's 150, 108 pages that say read page 1. The reason why there is difficulty and competitive spirit is that everyone wants to be supreme. And the last sentence, before we do an exercise of this chapter, and we'll have a discussion, is, remember, in every bad relationship you ever had, you were there. Did you know that? Did you notice? Any of you notice that you were in every bad relationship you ever had? You didn't notice, right? It wasn't my fault. Yeah. Right, it wasn't your fault. You just happened to be walking by. Hare Krishna. So, let's have some question or discussion, then we'll do an exercise that I think will help you a lot. Or another way of saying that, the constant factor in every bad relationship you ever had was you. The common denominator of every bad relationship you ever had was you. So, we have any questions or comments? Arguments? Debates? Doubts? Yes?
When there's a problem with somebody else, and everybody else has the same problem with that person, then you, instead of thinking it's your fault, you would think it was the person's fault because he has the same. He's different. Everyone finds it difficult to deal with.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good point. Hokshaja is saying that sometimes you're working with someone and everybody has the same problem. You know, as we say in America, when that person shows up, we say, "Here comes trouble." And everyone's, "Yep, you're right, here comes trouble." You know, everyone's having trouble with that person. So, in that sense, we can, I think, all agree, well, it's not really our fault, this person just doesn't know how to deal with people. Okay, so I accept that, because that is a fact. It does happen. But then the next question is, how well can you deal with trouble? Here comes trouble. Are you going to make more trouble? Or are you going to pacify trouble? Neutralize trouble? You're going to figure out how to work with trouble. How do you deal with trouble? So that's where we have to go with that. Like, there's so many situations in the world that push our buttons, but they don't have to. But they do. And if I'm upset about something in which all of you would also have been upset about, you would tell me, yeah, of course, anyone would be upset about it. That's okay, but maybe I could do better than be upset. Okay, it's an upsetting situation. I acknowledge it. Could I do better? Now, one strategy is I was mentioning that Prabhupada used sometimes when two people couldn't cooperate. If all attempts failed to get them to cooperate, then Prabhupada would just put them in different services, so they couldn't work together. But ideally, it's better they learn to cooperate. There's also something I think that's important, at least for older devotees to recognize, is that when Prabhupada put someone in authority, he wanted everyone to follow them. He said, he's the authority, follow them. And that was like really difficult, especially if the authority wasn't that capable, or you felt you were smarter than that person. It was really hard to work with them. But Prabhupada's point was you have to work with somebody. And there are different systems of management. You can be an authority, but you can take everyone's opinion and you can conjointly work things out together. And more so than when Prabhupada was here, that is more common today. It's interesting, maybe you could say, not interesting, but amazing, that we as hippies who rejected authority were accepting the senior devotees as authority because Prabhupada said you should accept them that way. But things have become more consensus-based and democratic-based in organizations now than they were 50 years ago. So as far as I understand, it's more difficult for people in their 20s to do that now than it was 50 years ago, 40 years ago, when we were in our 20s. So sometimes you become a leader and you think, when I was young, I just did what my boss said, or what the temple commander said, or the temple president said. Now I'm temple president, and people are like, yeah, you told me to do this, but I don't think it's a good idea. And we're thinking, well, I never talked back to my temple president. But we have to realize times change. And so for the person to say that, it's not that necessarily being disobedient or belligerent, they're just giving their opinion that they think it could be done in a better way. And so we have to adapt to that. The older people. The younger devotees probably don't have so much of a problem with that, but the older devotees will. Because it was a different culture. Right? Dictatorship. I'm in charge, you do what I say. Simple, right? Things get done. We were okay with that. We had a lot of good devotees in charge. We were happy. They were nice people, we worked with them. But times have changed, and now also we were short for manpower, and we don't always have leaders who were really by nature leaders, but they're just doing the best they can because no one else will do it. And sometimes it's hard to work with them because they're not that experienced or knowledgeable. And so having a more egalitarian management can often work better in those situations. So nobody should think, I'm in charge, so I'm the man. I'm in charge equals everything I say is right. No, not necessarily. Could be, but not just because you have a position now did you get divinely guided in all your decisions. But Prabhupada's point is, even in those cases, sometimes, until those things are worked out, you just have to follow. Because it'll be chaos if you don't. He said, okay, you may not agree, but at least follow until you work it out. So that's a challenge, isn't it? Like do something it's maybe, in your opinion, is not the best, but for now it's just going to create harmony if I do it, so I do it. Yes? Anything else? Yes?
As a spiritual movement and a religious organization, surely we should put everything encapsulated spiritually, from a spiritual point of view. Like, for example, every morning we say we're lower than the straw in the street. And
yeah.
to repeat that to ourselves 3 or 4 times a day, that should bring us down.
Yeah, it should be manifest in the culture. That's the challenge. Get it from the head to the culture. Yeah, it's true that, there's a story. There was a point in time in ISKCON management, they were bringing in experts. So for the experts to come in, they'd have to get acquainted with Prabhupada's teachings and his managerial structures and corporate structure. And so they brought one expert in, and I was told, he said, I have nothing to tell you, just follow what your guru told you, because anything I could tell you would be the same. So that's kind of funny, right? You're bringing in an expert and he tells you to follow your guru. Like, why did you call me in? He already gave you everything. So you can't see the forest for the trees, so that's the problem. And sometimes what's obvious is not obvious. That's the problem also. Isn't it? Well, yeah, it's obvious. We should be humble. That would make for very good leadership and cooperation amongst all of ourselves. We don't need to be right. That's the false ego entering, but it doesn't always work like that. So easy. If it did, we would probably not have any problems. Or we would not see any behavior amongst the devotees that would indicate it's behavior like ordinary people. And once Prabhupada told a devotee, he was not tolerating something. They were on a plane. Prabhupada said, everyone else is tolerating it, except you. So he said, you're worse than everyone else. He said, don't be like an ordinary person. But the ordinary persons were even tolerating what he couldn't tolerate. So you're like lower than an ordinary person. No, but I'm a devotee. That means I'm better. Yeah, maybe you're better, but look how you're acting now. Worse than everybody else. So that's the challenge. I wear the hat, it says Hare Krishna devotee. That makes me like elevated, special, better. Even though I act like everyone else or worse, I'm better. Well, how'd you get better if you're acting worse than everyone? Worse means worse. Worse doesn't mean better. So that's the challenge. Yes, sir.
So, kind of, from what I understood, in the Vedic style of management is quite autocratic, so if you're kind of becoming more democratic, does it mean that we are straying a bit away?
Well, Hari Sari said that Prabhupada said in Kali Yuga decisions should be made in groups because no one person is qualified. So apparently democracy is a good thing for Kali Yuga, or the least of all evils. Because, the other day I was thinking, bring back monarchy. It really works when you have a good monarch. But of course, you need a good monarch. So it's a disaster if you have a bad monarch, and it's a dream if you have a good monarch. But if you don't have good monarchs, you have to do democracy because it's a system of checks and balances. But even democracy is failing. In the case of Trump, they can't just get a handle on him because he squirms out, because he's the president. So the king can do no wrong. So democracy even fails with its intended purpose of checks and balances. But in Vedic culture, you had Brahmins. So when you had Vena, people like Vena, they would just impeach him with their mantras. It was a quick impeachment, he would just die. So it was like, the Brahmins would decide, okay, he's not qualified. His death would be a great blessing to the world. And so they chant a few mantras and send him on his way. So, there were checks and balances to autocracy. Because the Brahmins were on top. And that was the example, Vena. They tolerated him up to a point and said, okay, that's it. He is a disaster for the world. And the best place he could be is in another body where he won't create problems. So let's move him on. Yes?
It seems that acharyas kind of recognized this because there was this one acharya system, and from Bhaktisiddhanta they introduced GBC instead of one acharya.
Yeah, and there's these the challenge, if you want to call it a challenge, or the adaptation is from the guru with his disciples in his ashram to a multi-guru international organization. So obviously there's going to have to be some things changing, but some will argue that it could be too corporate and too bureaucratic, and then you lose the tradition of the guru-disciple. But the interesting thing about Srila Prabhupada is that a lot of times he didn't enforce things on his disciples, but he let them decide. Maybe you'd like to do this. Or what about this? What do you think? So even the guru, who by Shastra has absolute authority over the disciple, was not always using that absolute authority, unless he was certain the disciples could do it, or unless it was a Shastric injunction that we all must do, 4 principles, 16 rounds like that. But in terms of specific service, not always would he enforce against the disciples' will. It's interesting, right? That even sometimes devotees had problems following exactly everything Prabhupada wanted. And Prabhupada saw that. One lady, her husband had left and she had come in to speak to Prabhupada about her future. So the question was, should I remarry? She actually came in with her brother, and I think he was the spokesperson. Should she remarry? She must have been in her late 20s at that point. And Prabhupada said something interesting. He said, "Do you want my opinion, or do you want me to tell you what to do?" Something like that. Like I'm your guru, but you're asking me to tell you what to do, or you just want to just get an idea and think about it. And that's Srila Prabhupada. What to speak of us? He's the one with all authority, Krishna speaking to him. And still, we had difficulty hearing. And Prabhupada knew that, and so he adjusted. Not in every case, some case, it must be done this way. Why you're not doing this? But in other cases, there was more leeway. Putting it into larger context, Prabhupada wanted his devotees to be inspired and happy. So be engaged in some way that you're inspired and happy. What you do is not as important. You don't want to serve yourself into misery, doing some service that is not inspiring. That's a dangerous statement, right? To say that in a small temple. Well, Mahatma Prabhu said you shouldn't do a service not inspired to do, so I'm quitting this service. Yeah. But Prabhu, there's no one else to do it. Well, I'm just following what Mahatma Prabhu said. Yeah, it's right there. He said it. Yes.
I was wondering about the cooperation that sometimes we could develop between ISKCON and other organizations, maybe religious or social. Is it good to also?
We can interface. Yeah. It's been done a lot. The interesting thing is that there are other organizations who share some of our concerns, or even some of the stated purposes for ISKCON are shared in some direct or indirect or remote way. And you have to see on a case-by-case basis. It depends how they would engage, what they would do. But certainly when we're doing work in the public, if they like us, they could bring people to programs and support us. We could support them in some ways. You have to see, on a organization by organization, and also what you're doing, to know where it will work and where it won't work. And sometimes you may have to compromise your principles, and you don't want to compromise. In order to work with them, you would have to make some compromise, and it may not be healthy, so you just avoid it. Or you avoid it, but you just can't work with it. So, anything else? Yes.
With the cooperation, you were saying monarchy works, doesn't it? And if monarchy doesn't work out, then the alternative is democracy. And there's two other two other alternatives. One is anarchy, and another one is capitalism. And the idea of what is saying that for the children, communism works best. They all get the same.
Vaishya, capitalism,
And
Kshatriyas, and for the Vaishyas, for the Brahmins, anarchy. Yeah, but you're working, yeah. Anarchy means they're independent, they're not controlled.
That's right.
So they can make decisions based on what's true, rather than politicians who make decisions based on getting votes or funding.
I was thinking, well, if you had democracy and it was just amongst the Brahmins made the decisions, then that would work.
Yeah, it's kind of like the president, the prime minister's cabinet, or whatever you call it. He has, what do you call his advisors? Cabinet? Yeah, it's like, that's basically the duty of Brahmins. Well, like they used to say, Chanakya Pandit was the prime minister. So ministers. So the king had ministers, which would seem to indicate consultants giving advice. But they maintain their independence. In other words, let's say the king's supporting them. So because if someone's supporting you, sometimes you're in a compromised position. So you don't want to say something that would ruffle their feathers or upset the status quo, because they might say, well, it's time to leave the kingdom. Because the Brahmins were anarchistic, independent, were not afraid to say what they had to say. They didn't care whether they lived here or there. So they were detached enough that they could always be truthful, and detached enough that they had the interest of people in mind. That was, their decisions were only made for the welfare of others. And so the idea was, the kings are not as pure, and they may not make decisions they may make decisions that will benefit them more than others, so the Brahmins would ensure that wouldn't happen. And so you see this thing with Trump, and like they're trying to control him, and there's nobody can control him. His own people can't control him. And all they do is defend him for all the bad things he does, because they don't know what else to say. Well, he said that, but he didn't really mean it. And, in this context, it was innocent. He didn't know the law. Wasn't trying to do anything wrong. But that's not what Brahmins do. No, Brahmins go, Trump, take a hike, you're out. It's over. It's quick and clean. Not that they would kill someone, but if someone transgresses the duty of the post, then the Brahmins are not political figures being maintained and supported. They don't need votes. They don't need corporate money to stay in power. So this democratic system it's corrupted at the core by the way it functions, because you need votes and you need money. So you can't say what has to be said, because if you do, you won't get the votes and money. So you say what gets the votes and money, which may not be exactly the best thing. That's why you need Brahmins, because Brahmins don't care. They've got nothing to lose. They say what they have to say and then just walk out. It's like, let things fall as they may. They don't care. They just care that they said what's true. So when you see things in that light, you see how bad things are in the political system, how bad it is, because there's no Brahmins. Yes, sir.
I was just wondering, Srila Prabhupada did speak a lot about self-sufficiency, so if we become self-sufficient, even if we're not Brahmins, we can be not dependent on corporations.
Yeah. Well, that also is there, yeah. Definitely not to be dependent on the structure of cities and so forth. He wanted that. Because Prabhupada saw this whole structure as demoniac, and if you're part of it or controlled by it, then you're compromised. Being part of that system, 9 to 5 and the whole thing. Compromises your sadhana, your sanity. What to speak if you work in a factory? Which Prabhupada named factories as hell. Synonym of factory is hell. And the result, it depletes you of your vital energy. You come home just burnt out, ready for some beer to recuperate. So obviously Prabhupada didn't like that. And what are you manufacturing in the factory? Things that you can't eat, that you don't need, that nobody really needs. Let's speak if it's the factory in China. Like 1,000,001 things nobody needs. But how to do that, that's another thing. But, definitely that's what Prabhupada wanted, but how to do it, that's another thing. Hare Krishna. Gauranga. You had something?
Yeah, just I had a controversial thing in my sannyasi was giving class, and he said the problem in Kali Yuga is that the Malachas, meaning us in this kind, the Malachas are doing the work of the Brahmins.
Yeah.
And he said that the Brahmins have gone to Silicon Valley. All the Brahmins from India have gone there to make money, and then all the Malachas have to do the work that they should be doing.
Where have all the Brahmins gone? Silicon Valley. Long, long ago. Where have all the Yavanas gone? To Vrindavan. To become Brahmanas. Long, long ago. And Prabhupada saw all that. And that's why Prabhupada said, you're learning technology, you're begging from the West. I never begged, I gave. You're coming to the West to get their technology. This is before you could learn technology in India. You'd have to come to universities in the West. And he's saying, you're begging technology, you're supposed to be giving enlightenment. What can be done? Things will balance out. They have to balance out. The whole experiment of Western materialistic civilization has fallen on its face. It's just that the average person doesn't want to admit it or doesn't even understand it. But the intellectuals, they already gave up on it long ago. They understand materialism is a dead end. It zaps your vitality, it goes nowhere, it destroys you spiritually. It's just good for the economy. So you can live like a big fat pig and have a big fat car and a big fat house. And get some slaves to work for you and pay them peanuts, and you can, that's what it's all about. And you can make your, $20 million a year and pay your slaves like $10,000, $12,000 a year. So they can live in a studio and just get some scraps to eat. And you can live in your mansion and take your have your holiday homes and yachts, and it's like, in Vedic culture, the Vaishyas, they generate income, but they were doing things that were necessary for people. It was part of the job description. It wasn't to make money, it was to serve people. Grow the food, make sure the necessities are produced. It was a different service. Now, what's the service of a Vaishnava? Get as much as you can, as quickly as possible. That's not very noble. Employ as many people as you can. Produce products that will help people, upgrade people in the world. Yeah, that's fine. And this idea, buy a little this, invest in that, sit on your rear end, 10 years later you're a millionaire. That was not, that you'll never find any description that that's the dharma of a Vaishnava. Of a Vaishnava, investments, real estate, stocks, gold, currency trading. It's all like this. There's no description. That's what a Vaishya does. He produces food. That's the main thing, and takes care of cows, and lends money, handles money. There's got to be some banking or something. Maybe there doesn't have to be. It can be all barter. But no, there was gold standard. Yeah. I was saying yesterday, I think it was Henry Ford, or someone said, if you understood the banking system, actually how it works and operates, if the American or if the people in the world understood the banking system, there would be a revolution. They would go on the banks and destroy them. He said, but most people don't understand how it works. And the founders, your British brothers who were the revolutionaries who founded America, one of them said, or more than one said, when the banks have power to the way they have today, he said that will be the end of the country. And Prabhupada used to say that, it's just a matter of time, it can't last. The economy it can't last in this way. There used to be a gold standard. There was gold backing the notes. Nixon, and I don't know in your country, but in America, Nixon, he nipped it. Said no longer will that be there. And so then it's just print money as needed. I'm reading Shyama Sundar's book. He's in India in 1971. So there were 8 rupees to $1. Now it's around 72 to 74. So what do? You just got to print more money to keep up with it. And initially the banks printed their own money. Did you know that? Do you know how that started? Like, let's say you had tons of gold, and that was your wealth, or silver, or jewels, or whatever, and you're bartering it. And so this doesn't work. Just stick it in the bank. The bank will get your gold. They'll print up money, and you can give people this money. Then they can go to the bank and get their gold. That's how money started. And the government said, "Wait a minute, we can't let the banks do that. They're making tons of money on this. They're controlling everything. We've got to make our own money." So they started printing their own money. But at least they had gold to back it up, because that's what the banks did. And then gradually, at some point, for various reasons, I'm not an economist or an historian, but
A pound was a pound of gold.
yeah. So you can go to the government and demand your pound of gold, right? Let's try it. If we get our pounds, then we could build a lot of temples. Yes?
Srila Prabhupada often said that real wealth is in the land and the cows.
Yes.
Now, throughout the world, a lot of people are recognising that the soil is the most valuable asset, and it's gradually...
You know what, I want to hear something interesting. Wasn't it a pound of sterling, not a pound of gold? Or they should... Yeah.
Because a pound of gold will be a lot.
10 pounds sterling. Yeah, well, 10 pounds sterling is also... I was in Ukraine, and there were 2 professors I was talking to. And I believe they said... I'm assuming it was World War II, maybe there was another war. He said, I think, it doesn't matter exactly what happened, but he said the Germans were coming in, or somebody was coming in, and they were stealing the soil, because Ukraine had the best soil in the world. They were coming in to steal soil. Interesting. So if you could completely destroy the earth with Monsanto and all the other pesticides and screw the weather up and everything turns into a desert, you know, food's going to be a problem. Right?
Actually kind of farming now, it's just a new business has been come up very recently called carbon farming. They don't try to grow food, they're just trying to increase the amount of carbon in the soil. So it's actually it's becoming a sector of agriculture.
Of course, obviously, if traditional methods of farming were used, then this wouldn't be necessary. It's like Prabhupada, he said something really interesting, and it's kind of funny. He was saying how there are so many advancements that we see coming, but the advancements are just because there's a problem, and we don't look at the problem. Oh, this is a very advanced way of farming, you know, carbon, this and that. Yeah, but why? Because they messed it up. So it's just trying to balance out the problem, but everybody thinks, oh, this is really good, you know. You know, we got this, you know, this is like old-fashioned heaters. In America, you have central heating. It just blows hot air into every room, you know. One thing outside and every room in the house is hot. You don't have to adjust each room. It's like, wow, that's fantastic, great. Yeah, well, what's the problem? The problem is it's freezing out. So, you know, I have this great heater, but the reality is it's suffering. It's cold and we're suffering. So he said, people don't see like that.
It's like that with organic. They say we've got get these organic carrots, and all the sort of saying really is we've completely failed with every other type of agriculture, and we're going back to square one now. That's all it is, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, that and a demand for it, but it's true. So you go first full circle after you mess everything up. You go, oh, we have this natural organic, this and that. And you go, yeah, well, that's all they had until like whenever, 1930 or 40, until we got really modern and big factories were producing food that had no value, and then they had to put vitamins, as you say, and minerals in the. It's like, oh, look at this bread, it's got all these ingredients. Yeah, because you took all of the ingredients out of it, and we had to put them back in, and now it's just a bunch of glue going in your body. Great, fantastic. You've got, you have Wonder Bread here? They have this company in America called Wonder Bread, and they, it's Wonder Bread because they put all these vitamins and minerals, because they took them all out. Well, fantastic. And people don't see, wait a minute, they were already in there in their original state before you took them out. We're advancing.
They say now that when a person dies, it takes his body 3 days longer to decompose because there's that much preservative in the food.
Oh yeah,
So
right, yeah.
For days.
Yeah. Or the kids are growing older, they're maturing faster because of the hormones in the food. Puberty is like much earlier now. Did you know that? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they have a thing in the can. They have a thing called a gender bender, and it's a preservative. It's to stop the thing going off in the can. But if you continually eat them, then it changes your gender.
You have these commercials. We have these commercials in America. They're the funniest commercials. When a new pharmaceutical product comes out, they do a commercial. I'm not exactly sure why, because it's the doctor who's going to recommend it, but maybe because of the commercial, the doctor's more inclined to recommend it. They have those commercials? Oh, you have to see these commercials. This is like the epitome of insanity. Just, I don't know what you Google, an American pharmaceutical commercial. So they show somebody with arthritis, oh, ask your doctor about, then they make their crazy name, make it sound like it's something. Arthorita, dilipidadol, scuba luba dooble, make it sound like a pharmaceutical. And then he goes, I couldn't shovel my plants, but now with arthritic ridicle diddle caboodle, I'm a new this and that, right? And it's just an actor doing it, right? There's no statistics on it. But the funny part is, by law, they have to list the side effects of the product. And so it's a whole drama. It's like a family, and he's happy because he can plant now, and there's nice music. But they have to list the side effects, but they keep the scene going with him smiling. Say, ask your doctor if arthrital biddle will be good for you. Side effects include, and sometimes the side effects are death, heart attack, seriously. Like fainting, But the music's going on and the scene's going on and he's still shoveling and the grandkids are there and he's holding them and shoveling and, And I'm looking at this, I'm like, this is not real. Like are people that dumb? That you like, because they have, like on the cigarette, this, basically it says it'll kill you. So at least we warned you, So this is the way Prabhupada saw the world, and he's like, we got to expose this. We got to let people know this is not the way it should go.
When I was at the doctor's, he gave me ibuprofen, but I know it makes your stomach bleed, so they gave me some other tablets with it. But she said, because I was taking the ibuprofen for headaches, so she says, well, listen, if you take these, they'll stop your stomach bleeding. But the side effect of taking them is it gives you a headache.
That's business not way.
Yeah. What's this pill for? It's for my headache. What's this pill for? Well, it's to get rid of the headache that the headache pill was supposed to get rid of. And what's that for? Well, to stop the bleeding that the headache pill is going to... Hare Krishna. And people are like, whatever, and just going off to work, working hard, and not thinking. So, Brahmins are the ones who think. And Brahmins help people think. And the manipulation of the minds, especially of younger people, is so you don't think and you just spend your money. Right?
That's why I thought it was incorrect. What that sannyasi said that we're born in Malachi families, but we weren't satisfied. We were thinking all the time outside the box.
Yeah.
So we gravitated towards it.
And Prabhupada said, he said that his disciples were all devotees. They took birth in the West. For whatever reason, we took birth to help him, or we had to fulfill our American desires. We're all Indians with our eyes on America, not yet perfect. Who knows? But he never addressed us as Malachas Yavanas. I mean, occasionally he might say, you were. But he said, we're training you to be Brahmins. There's no Brahmins. You are now the Brahmins, by default. And, he said, you follow these principles, you're qualified. More than all these other Brahmins. Maybe those people in Silicon Valley were capable of being Brahmins or should have been Brahmins, but they were groomed to be Shudras from within the womb, wasn't it? You go to Vrindavan, and around Vrindavan there's all these technical schools. So the Brajbasis are being groomed in technical schools. Hare Krishna. It's nice to understand Varnashram, because when you understand how it's supposed to work, then you really get a clear idea how messed up things are. I mean, we know things are messed up, but you get clarity on how messed up it is when you understand how things are supposed to be, and why, when they're that way, they work. Just protecting cows. If all you did is just protect cows, the whole world would be a different place. And there's one devotee in Mayapur, he's very into cows and educating people about cows, and he said the cow dung is more valuable than the milk, because it can turn deserts into lush tropical environments. So we're all about cows and milk, of course, but when the cow dries up, cow dung is still more valuable than the milk. Yes. So, we're good? We're happy? We'll stop now? Or you want to do an exercise? Or what do you want to do? Oh, yes. Question?
I have a question. I read this book about emotional management, and it looks like in the business world, people kind of recognize that just being, if the management is just autocratic, then it kind of creates disharmony among people, maybe because they have big false ego in the Kali Yuga, because that one, the disharmony would not be there. And therefore,
You say if it's autocratic, it creates harmony, or it doesn't?
Disharmony. Yeah, it creates too much disharmony.
Disharmony.
This is from the business point of view.
Yeah.
Obviously, because, the kind of, with somebody bossing around, and then, people...
Suppresses individuality.
And so on and so on. So the advice is not just like a one system, but it's like 6 different types, I think, management styles.
Yeah.
And it's not that autocratic doesn't have its value. It does have, sometimes...
Sometimes in emergency you need...
Emergency,
yeah.
This is the way it is, and that's it.
Yeah.
But it's like a combination of a few, and the more a leader can learn different management styles,
Yeah.
the more it's productive.
I was also talking to Sri Prabhupada once about corporate culture, and he said there are all kinds of corporate cultures, and one culture doesn't work for every organization. So that's also interesting. So it's kind of like Ayurveda, what's your nature? Carrots are good, but not for you. So yeah, that's a good leader. He's adaptive. For me, as someone who travels to various countries, I totally have to adapt to the culture. Because I can't just say, well, over here we do this. Yeah, but that's over there. It doesn't work here. So, here, go here. No, how does it work here? They just want me to tell them what to do, because that's how they think in that country. But in this other country, no, they want to sit and talk and discuss and share ideas. So you do what works best. But more and more, the democratic approach amongst younger people is more common. But they say, yeah, you need autocracy sometimes when, nobody can figure anything out and it's going on forever, and you just go, okay, here, this is what we're going to do. The CEO just says, or there's an emergency, and he's like, you do this, you do this, you do. You can't have a meeting. So obviously there's time for it. But we're seeing, even with the guru and disciple, it's not always easy for the disciple to follow the guru. Yes, Guru Maharaj, but what about this, what about that? And you asked me to do this, but that's kind of hard, and couldn't I do that? And it's realities, and the gurus adapt to it all the time.
In your experience traveling around in the areas where you go, where it's mainly young devotees, is it easier for cooperation to take place, or is it easier where there's more older devotees?
I think it's easier with younger devotees. I think it's more their culture. They're more egalitarian. Older ones, I think the older ones grew up in a different culture, I mean, women couldn't even vote till the 1930s. I don't know about your country. And so all these prejudices and so forth we grew up with, and we grew up in a more autocratic system. I can't say for sure, but this is what I observe. The young people seem to... Young, I mean 20s. Once they get in their 30s, sometimes they're too old. But they tend to do better. Be more communally oriented. But that might have been true about us when we were young also. I can't say. It may not just be that in this year or this day and age, but it could be the age group. The problem is when you get older, you think you've figured everything out and you get set in your ways and you want to do it a certain way. So sometimes it's harder to compromise. But I think the point that Prabhupada is making is that it's the most practical way to do the most, is to work within the group and to adjust to be able to do it. Kama Lakshana. Yes.
How do you perceive the difference created by the number of devotees in ISKCON now as compared to 30 years ago?
The difference in the devotees themselves?
Just the dynamics of management and preaching also, that now,
How is it different?
Even now, I'm not the man travel very much. Get involved in lots of projects, but I probably know 400 devotees now, maybe to speak to, who I would consider to be someone I could call a friend.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be able to have a conversation with them, and talk about the same things that we all share together. Whereas, 30 years ago, for myself, I would have only known 20 or 30 people.
Oh, yeah.
So, I just wondered, in your perception, does that cause a lot of problems for people or for managers? Or just is it...
Well, I think the underlying principle is for all of us to understand, not just managers, is that as technology changes, it changes culture. As knowledge is made more available, there's so many. It's like, I have 3 books and I have 8 CDs. Like 50 years ago, I would have had, if I was the same age 50 years ago, I'd have no books and no CDs, because the only way I could do it is I'd have to sign a contract with a record company. Or I'd have to sign a contract with a book publisher. Where now is just lay it out. I can record everything on my computer, make a CD, throw it up on YouTube, and here I am. Same thing with a book, put it on Kindle. So we have access to more information, and that more than ever before. And more entertainment, and more, you can make a video on your little Mac laptop. You can make a documentary, your little $1,000 camera or $2,000 camera. You get $5,000, you can be like Hollywood practically. Whereas to be Hollywood back 50 years ago, you needed a budget and education. So my point is, there's so much information through video, through music, through books that are being produced by people who could have never produced them. So that's changing how the people see the world. How is it that you could take a city like this and it could become like the #1 vegan place in the world without social media? It would have never happened, right? Because you know how things are happening all around the world. You can read it. You can hear Paul McCartney and his vegetarian thing. You can read about vegan this and animal slaughter that, and from anywhere in the world. So I think for us as individuals, and especially leaders, we have to be adaptive all the time because things are changing. Like my daughter is so different than me in how she was raised, not just as a devotee, but just in that generation. Political correctness pervades that generation. When they see injustice, it bothers them a lot. Discrimination, racial discrimination, which was common for me. It was just like, we didn't even notice it. It was just like, oh yeah, there's a black guy. Oh yeah, he's a black guy. It's like, yeah, he's a black guy. We're white guys. We don't hang together. That was just like, yeah, whatever. We didn't even think about it. But now, if my daughter like, why don't you have any black friends? What's wrong with you? You know what I mean? Maybe I do. I do. But she just doesn't see them. But you know what I'm saying? It's like culture's changing all the time. So we have to be adaptive to understand that. And so we know how to deal with people. So I don't know if that answered your question, if that's what you were asking, but I think that's one of the big differences. Culture changes.
Because of the internet, then our ability to get to know a little bit about people sufficiently to be able to consider them like a friend or a colleague.
Yeah, well, that doesn't work.
It's expanding at such a rate that,
Well, you call them friends, but if you're in an accident, are they going to come and take care of you? You're 500 Facebook friends? I don't think so. So I think the problem is those kinds of relationships can be a little weird, because you kind of think you've cemented a deeper relationship than you actually have, because it's hard to cement it deeply unless you're with a person. And it's awkward. Because I have so many relationships with disciples that are digitally, that they're mostly digital. But, that's a different relationship than being in person. And I see it also, being in person, how much more it helps them. And it creates a bond, and we're closer. Obviously, right? Relationship goes deeper. It's like my wife says, you're getting to meet someone online, from another country, and you think you like one another. You have no idea until you meet one another.
There's a famous picture of there's two people in the funeral parlor sitting in the chair, and then the priest is saying to the guy, he says, it's funny, isn't it? He's got 5,000 friends on Facebook, but only 2 people turned up for his
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. A lot of people have said social media is good for getting things done, but not good for relationships. Yeah, it's great. We're working on a project. You send me a message. I finished it. Here's the drawing. I look at it. Could you correct this and that? It's like fantastic. Never before could we do that. Where I could work in real time with someone across the country. It doesn't even cost any money. Right? So that's good. Or you're editing my book. You don't have to be where I am. You just edit it. We can talk about it on Skype. So I think that's a good point. It's really good for getting things done. It's good for business and not so good for relationships. That's what I was doing before we came here. I was just on WhatsApp talking to people, doing different projects. We're planning this, planning that, even talking philosophy, having a discussion. But in terms of, even a philosophical discussion you can have online, fine. But forging relationships. I think I said the other day, I think there's so many things we would not say to one another face to face that we say to the general public in commenting upon something I said or you said. We feel more free. So it's kind of creates this virtual relationship. It's not so real, it's awkward. Because we may deal with one another in ways we would not deal with one another in person. I mean, we who grew up before the age of social media sometimes are amazed to see what people say about one another on internet, because we would never say that. What to speak of post it to the world? We would never do, we wouldn't send a letter to the editor and tell everybody how bad Yavad is, because he did Mangalartik late today. What's the future of this temple? Pujari can't even do it on time. We would never do that, and now that's common. So I think it's given people power that they don't know how to use, because power should not be given to everybody. Or like you're saying, the Yavanas become Brahmins. They can become Brahmins if they're actually Brahmins, but if you make them so-called Brahmins and they stay mlechas, they'll destroy with that power. So now everyone's a writer, everyone's a politician, their voice is heard around the world, and some people get their voice heard. Especially if you say bad things, you're going to get a lot of hits, because it's controversial. If I put out a post, have you heard what happened, what so-and-so Maharaj did? I'll get immediately 1,000 people. What did he do? Tell me, So it's like incited people's need for hearing gossip. And we can be pretty certain that Prabhupada would say, use the internet for business, but don't use it for gossip. We know that he would not be pleased. Frivolous activity. What's frivolous activity? Activity that wastes time. So even if I'm condemning someone, and for no real reason other than it just to get it off my chest, that's wasting time. That's frivolous also. But Prabhupada said about the telefax machine, he said, you'll use it to gossip. It was the precursor to the fax machine. When they got it, the devotees were proud. We can type a letter here, and there's a machine on the other part of the world that can type out my letter. It goes through a telephone line. And then they came up with fax, which just photocopies and sends it. And when Prabhupada heard about that they got it, he said, you'll just use it for gossip. So he was already predicting social media. And so for all the good it's done some tremendous harm, specifically in the field of blasphemy of devotees, which is a real cancer for the heart of a Vaishnava to hear. And what I've seen also is people who have agendas are very willing to post things bad that they can't verify. I can just make up a story about you. Oh, you hear what Yavad did? And then I tell Trilokesh, and you go, really? Yeah, that's really bad. I better tell the temple president. Pretty soon, everyone's talking about a story I made up. And that could happen very easily, right? It's like people are sitting waiting to hear bad things about leaders in ISKCON. So you just have to put up something, And they'll put it on their site without investigating. Yeah, these guys are so bad. This has to be true. You know, so-and-so Swami's been a devotee for 50 years, been a sannyasi for 40. Oh, he has 3 girlfriends. Yeah, right. You know, he's making the world Krishna conscious. You don't do that with 3 girlfriends. But they'll be willing to post it. So that's the downside of it. And then we have to just going through our pages, we have to sometimes hear that. And even if you don't believe it, just hearing it, it's affecting you in a bad way. So, yeah, it's nice to talk to devotees, communicate with them around the world, see what's going on. But it's, it's mixed. Because a lot of us like to complain. And we have a lot of pent-up anger for things that we feel were unfair, that we haven't healed or processed. And so social media is a good place to just let it fly. Isn't it? I couldn't talk to my temple president about it, so I'll just tell the world. And, sorry if I have to, say something bad about him, but he wouldn't talk to me, so isn't it? And it's kind of our fault if we're leaders and we don't let people talk to us, then they'll take to social media because they want to tell people how they were treated, how unfairly they were treated. So it's like anything, There's a good way to use it and a bad way. But here's some advice I can give you that I follow. Every communication I send, I make sure that it passes the KC test. Like anyone in the world could read it and go, okay, yeah. Like there's nothing in it that's exaggerated. There's nothing in it that's offensive. There's nothing in it that's not true or even remotely not true. There's nothing in it that's not Krishna conscious. I always think when I send somebody a message or someone's asking me something about a situation, if this were put out to every devotee in ISKCON, would they be okay with it? Would they say, oh, Mahatma's this or that for writing this? Or would they say, no, what he said is right. It's true, it's honest, it's objective. So I think that's I think that's important. When someone says something upsetting, if you're going to reply to it in a way that, is this okay if the whole world sees it? Is it Krishna conscious? Is it objective? Is it sattvic? Because like you say, we're trying to be Brahmins, but we don't come from a Brahmin background. So it's very easy for us to slip out of Brahmin mode into Rakshasa mode, basically. No, not Rakshasa mode, but you know what I'm saying. Into this mode of just anger and resentment and all these tamasic qualities. Because they're there, they're stirring around there. It doesn't take much to stir them up, right? And once they stir up, it's just easy to express them because you don't have to talk to the person. You just write it. And even if you're talking to the person through writing, it's a lot easier to say something nasty, isn't it, than to say it in person. Plus, you won't get punched in the nose if you say it, but you might if you say it in person. But some of the things people say, I would imagine they would get punched. So, what do you think? Virtual relationships, not highly recommended. If that's the best you can do, okay, but personal is better.
One thing I think it's our communication with devotees in other parts of the world here, the main communication we used to have would be through the Sankirtan newsletter.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we would get to know about what
Yeah.
we're doing in other parts of the
Yeah,
world.
news is great, definitely. And you're a little isolated, so it's good to be in touch, for
So I
sure.
think the Sankirtan newsletter, which is now online, that's an amazing way to get inspired about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, despite everything I said, social media can be used. It could be used to forge good relationships and inspire and inform. And yeah, we were always inspired when we heard Sankirtan results. We heard what other devotees were doing, how they were doing it. That was like what kept the movement going, in a sense, just hearing about the service of everyone. Yeah.
I've noticed that even though I subscribe to the Sankirtan newsletter, because it's one of many other things which I subscribe to, and it's not as exciting.
Oh yeah,
But whenever
you're overloaded.
Whenever I read it, it's like, wow, why have I not been reading these? It's like I'm addicted.
Well, that's another point. We're overloaded with information, and that's not so good. And I don't know if devotees have more trouble chanting japa now than they did 50 years ago because of all the distractions and just the fact that we multitask so much. So, yeah. I think it's good to put some limits on the overdose of information. Because then we don't have time to read Prabhupada's books because we're just reading all these feeds. Okay, we can stop? I have permission to stop? You're okay? For now? You're okay until later?
Can you squeeze a quick exercise in?
What? I can give you the exercise. Could take you an hour. Well, I'll just tell you the exercise. Take it home with you. Like we said, in every relationship, every bad relationship you had, the common factor was you. You were in every relationship. So if you think of some friction you have in a relationship, even if it's the other person's fault, obviously, objectively, everyone has trouble with this person, but just try to think, what did you do to contribute to that ineffectual relationship or toxic or dysfunctional relationship? What did you do? Now, what could you have done that maybe would have neutralized it or even made it work better? And when you discover that, and you think about it, it's probably something that's pretty universal in your life. That doesn't just happen in one relationship. It probably happens in a lot of relationships or situations, may not only be relationships. And so that would be a good discovery, and that would be something you could now work on. Now that you're aware that this is a weakness or this is the way you react. If somebody doesn't agree with you, you react in a certain way. Or if someone promises to do something, they don't do it, you react in a very negative way and say, like, why? And how could you, what's triggering that, and how could you do better? Because if you don't understand that, it'll keep coming up, and it'll keep creating problems in relationships. Not every relationship, but in many. I mean, some of us, it's just our nature. If people don't agree with us, we can't deal with it. And that's a weakness, right? Or if people don't do this or do that, it upsets us. And so the question is why? And say, well, maybe because, I was let down 10 years ago, and now when people don't keep their commitments to me, it hurts me and I can't deal with it. Well, better learn to deal with it, because that's the way the world is. And that's going to help your relationships, right? Be more tolerant, more understanding, and so forth. Maybe I can't look from another person's perspective. I have blinders. It's a weakness. I need to be able to do that. So you ask these questions of yourself and meditate on it. And then when you find what it is, if you can find the cause, then you can start to work and say, okay, I think this way because my past is like this. All right, well, what if I think this way? Would that work? Then you realize, yeah, it would work better if I think this way. How could I think that way? What do I have to do? And usually the answer is just detach. Chant, detach, pray. Krishna give you the strength to be able to deal with it in a better way, more sattvic way. Is that okay? So you can meditate on that now. And then we can end it. You can all meditate on it also. Like you ever get really upset and you think, why? What was going on there? And especially if it's something that happens a lot, then it's really important to fix it if it happens a lot. Okay. Maybe we can talk about your answers tomorrow morning. Be an interesting discussion. Okay, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.